First of all, let me say what a great honor it is for me to be recognized with an honorary doctorate from the University of Padua. I would like to give my deepest thanks to the Rector of the university, to the Director of the Department of Economics and Management, and to all the faculty members here who have helped make this honor possible. Padua is one of the most distinguished and oldest universities in the world, and it's a fantastic honor to receive this degree from this university. In addition, however, receiving this honor in Italy and in Padua is especially meaningful both personally and professionally. Personally, I have family ties to Italy because the parents of my father migrated from southern Italy to the United States in the early 20th century. So I'm part of a very big wave of Italian immigrants growing up in the United States, and I've always been very proud of my Italian heritage. But professionally, it's also extremely important to have this distinction from the University of Padua because it brings together two parts of my professional career. In 2005, as was noted by the Rector in her remarks, it was the end of something called the Rockefeller Foundation Global Value Chain Initiative that gave rise to this framework when I and a number of colleagues from around the world were trying to create this framework. And in that year, 2005, we created the Duke Global Value Chains Center. So that was important in terms of the global value chain framework. But also in the spring of 2005, I had a chance to teach a course, two courses actually, at Venice International University, which was part of a consortium with Duke University, and a number of the faculty who are sitting here, who are connected both with the University of Padua and other universities in Italy, including Ca' Foscari, have been very influential in helping me understand how knowing more about Italy helps us understand more about global value chains. And I would say there's at least three different ways that working in Italy and on Italy has helped the development of that framework. First, I think teaching in Italy and working with my Italian colleagues gave me a much better understanding of the continued dynamism of local places, in particular Italian industrial districts that have been so well known around the world despite the trends towards globalization and many other areas. And I think the field research in particular that my Italian colleagues have conducted and I was able to share with many of them really gives deep insights into the continuing value of local places and local competitiveness in the global economy. Second insight I took away from my time at Venice International University and subsequent meetings with my Italian colleagues is the importance of a comparative framework. But comparative in two ways, because in Italy, these Italian districts were located in different parts of the country, but producing some of the same goods. So with Valentina De Marchi, for example, we had a chance to look at the gold jewelry district in three different parts of Italy. And comparing, and many other industries have that kind of comparative presence. Also, Italy plays a very important role within Europe as a location where competitiveness is important. So comparisons was another thing I drew from my experience here at Venice International University. And a final topic was the importance of small, medium enterprises and how they participate in the global economy. So all of those things, the importance of place, the importance of comparisons, the importance of small firms who nonetheless are successful in an era of globalization has been brought into the framework in some very important ways, and I really attribute that to my work here in Italy at Venice International University and at Padua as well. In terms of the main theme for my remarks today, I want to focus on evolving perspectives on globalization. And I titled the talk, Regionalization in a Post-Pandemic Supply Chain World. And I want to get us to the regionalization point by reviewing three main trends in globalization. And when I'm referring to globalization here, I'll focus mainly on economic globalization, trade, and foreign direct investment, which has been a very powerful force in the post-World War II era. Many other factors have been important besides trade and foreign direct investment in the global economy. Technology and scientific advances, military and security issues, social and political trends, and increasingly environmental issues. All of those have been important. But I think that economic globalization can be tracked through three major shifts, and I'll quickly identify what those are. The first shift I would call the era of expanding globalization, which probably dates from around 1960 until 2007, 2008. And for 50 years, economic globalization, this combination of trade and foreign investment, has expanded to most regions of the world. The process was driven largely by advanced industrial economies, US, UK, Western European economies, Japan. But developing regions of the world were also brought into the global economy, even if in very uneven ways, by two main development strategies. On the one hand, a number of developing economies pursued an export strategy. Some of them focused on natural resource exports. Other developing economies, like those in East Asia, focused on manufactured exports. So export strategies was one way to connect to the global economy. And in places like Latin America, where I did a lot of work, import substitution was a different model. But by 1980, import substitution fell to the side because of the bank crisis. So we had 50 years of expanding globalization. But in 2007, 2008, I think we entered a second period that I'll call fragmented globalization, because 2007, 2008 was the global economic recession. And when the recession hit, that export promotion strategy that many countries were following really was disrupted. The large countries in Europe, US, Japan, their imports dropped dramatically. So many of the countries around the world that were focused on export production, they also had to begin to change their development strategies. Big countries like China and India started to turn inward more and focus more on using their domestic economy as a source of growth. And China in particular pushed an advanced technology strategy called Made in China 2025, but there's other dimensions of it. So China was clearly interested not only in pushing the exports that it's had in the past in new high technology areas, but developing some of the leading technologies around the world. Other developing economies focus more on regional value chains. So in Latin America, you had a group of countries that were focused more on the Americas as part of their chains. In Europe, the EU 27 began to link Western Europe and Eastern and Central European economies in a regional way, and Asia as well had regional value chains. So I think in this era of fragmented globalization, we began to see some shifts because of the trade downturns. But that wasn't the only factor that caused disruptions. Two other big factors are important. One is economic nationalism. During the 2010s, many countries in the world began to have anti-globalization emphases from their local economies. I think first we saw that with Brexit. When the UK withdrew from the European Union, that was telling us that certain parts of the UK economy felt that they could gain more outside of a regional framework than inside. But this economic nationalism has been much, much broader. In the United States, we saw that with the Trump administration and beginning in 2017, where the campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," was partly defined by retreating from the world, a sort of fortress America, Other places it might be fortress Europe. So I think we have to understand globalization was defined partly by people who wanted to return to an international economy made up of nation states. And in the United States, it wasn't just a sentiment of protecting the US against imports from China, but also against Mexico, China, Europe. So the sentiment we had in the US for a period, and it still continues, is again a retreat from globalization to strengthen the domestic economy. And we're seeing those same kinds of pressures in many other countries around Europe and the world. Hungary, Turkey, Iran, Germany, and many others all have strong nationalist political groups. So I think that's telling us something important about what globalization did not deliver to different parts of these populations. That's part of a big political trend. Final part of fragmentation, of course, was the COVID-19 global pandemic. And what that global pandemic did, different from just economic nationalism or economic downturns, is it made supply chains all of a sudden a national security issue. In the United States and elsewhere, when we had shortages of medical supplies like face masks or ventilators or rubber gloves, people began to say, well, that could be a problem of globalization. These supply chains are broken. Maybe we need to rebuild them in the US. So this era of fragmentation had different causes, but was leading everybody to question globalization. So what I want to do in the last part of my remarks is return to this theme of where are we now? After this long trend of expanding globalization, a short, intense period of about 15 years of fragmented globalization, where do we go from here? And I think there's two big directions that people point to. There's one group, big group in lots of places, that says we should focus on deglobalization. Globalization itself has spread things too thin, made countries too vulnerable, so we should retreat perhaps into a world built around countries or nation states trading with one another like we had 150 or more years ago. Technically and practically, I think this is an impossible goal, even for the largest economies, for multiple reasons. Natural resources are global. No one country is going to have all the natural resources they need, so you have to rely on the global economy. But very importantly, industry supply chains are global. Every industry is internationally organized. Even the simplest products, like athletic footwear, can't be produced easily in one country. Adidas, the biggest athletic footwear company in the world, had tried to set up plants in Germany and the United States to make simple shoes, and they failed. They weren't able to bring the supply chain parts even for shoes. So I think that it's telling us that not only for supply chain reasons, but economically and politically, deglobalization is too risky. It puts, and importantly, I think international partnerships are still needed today more than ever. We see that not only in the military arena or geopolitical security, as with the current situation, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and other military conflicts. Scientifically, we see it, the importance of COVID-19 vaccines and international cooperation that led to those. And on a global scale, very important issues like climate change and global health. So what does regionalization mean in this context? What would it look like? I think this is where we would return to some of the key insights of the global value chain framework, because in the global value chain framework, we focused on global industries of different kinds. And in those industries, we asked questions, who controls those global industries? Which firms? So there's always asymmetries in power in these global industries. So what's the governance structure of these chains look like? But also, what do the upgrading pathways for different countries that participate in those industries look like? So I think from a value chain point of view, we want to know who creates value in the chain, who captures it, and how are the gains distributed to different countries that are part of these value chains. So I would conclude by saying I think reglobalization poses four main challenges that our research now has to confront as we move forward. One is, how do we rebuild more resilient value chains after the era of fragmentation that I mentioned? And I think there's at least four themes that come out, and we can identify others. One way is we make value chains more domestic, reshore, bring production back home, whatever our home country is. Second, we could nearshore. We could try to make goods not in our home country, but in neighboring countries, and that would reinforce the regionalization emphasis. There's an increasing discussion of friend shoring. You can cooperate with countries that share your values, even if they're not neighbors. And then I think we also have a type of strategic partnership. We have countries, every country is going to have other countries that they are strategic partners with. So any of those different ways would reconfigure the value chain in light of how do we rebuild them. So reshoring involves focusing on what you make. In the United States, this is a big topic. But what I get for the reshoring discussion from a value chain perspective is that often the most important products to reshore are not final products, but intermediate goods. So if you look at the Biden administration, they published a 100-day report in June of 2021, and they focused on 4 critical industries for the United States: semiconductors, active ingredients of pharmaceuticals, electric batteries for electric vehicles, and rare earth minerals. Every one of those industries is an intermediate product that feeds into other industries. So I think choosing carefully what we would want to reshore is a key issue. And secondly, we have to say who would make it. And I think what we're seeing in the United States and elsewhere is because production is global, many of the firms that are leaders in these industries are international firms. So in the United States, Biden administration passed the CHIPS Act. Many semiconductor plants are being built by a number of multinational firms, Korean, US, European. So I think that's step one. We have to figure out how to build more resilient value chains by reconfiguring their location. Second challenge, geopolitical security. I think clearly there is regionalization going on, but there are many ongoing military conflicts that every region has to deal with. I mentioned the Russian-Ukraine war, and Asia, there's China, Taiwan, and many other security issues. And other regions, Africa, Latin America, have their security issues as well. So those aren't going to go away. There's always going to be security risk and military conflict, so we need to figure out how to deal with those in this more regional environment. Third challenge, global inequality. Always there have been large, neglected regions of the world that globalization never really touched adequately. There's a lot of research by European scholars in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and different ways of creating new development strategies in that region. I've done a lot of work with colleagues on Latin America and elsewhere. So I think we have to pay attention to global inequality. And finally, and I think of growing importance, the fourth challenge, I think, is sustainability. Climate change and sustainable development has been part of what the United Nations has called attention to through its sustainable development goals. But I know a lot of my colleagues here in Italy and elsewhere are focusing on what are the new research questions around sustainability and how can we actually better understand those based on our prior research. I think the problems in sustainable development are fundamental and complex, but perhaps they can bring the large technically advanced countries of the world together around helping to propose solutions for the entire world that would involve input from all different regions. So I think we've got a great agenda of important topics going forward. I think, and I know that my Italian colleagues, who I am particularly close to on many of these issues, are already doing extensive research, but I think internationally, these are the challenges we have to face going forward as well. So I think globalization is still with us. It's taking on different characteristics, but I think these themes of regionalization, sustainability, and dealing with continued economic competitiveness will be the challenges for the 21st century. Thank you very much.